In the 1970s, Brian Connolly had one of the most beautiful sounds in rock music. He was the lead singer of Sweet, a very popular glam rock band. Everyone loved and sang along to their big hits, like Ballroom Blitz and Fox on the Run. Brian became a big star when these songs were played on the radio all the time. He was #1 on the charts and helped make a whole new type of song that people today still remember. Things were really hard behind the scenes, even though everything looked great from the outside. Brian wasn't ready for the stress and pressure that came with being well known. The people in the band started arguing with each other, and things slowly fell apart. Brian's life became very sad after he lost all of his fame. Before, he played in huge arenas with thousands of screaming fans. Now, he sings in small, empty bars where almost no one comes. Before, he was a famous star that everyone knew. Now, he's having a hard time just getting by each day. In his last few years, Brian finally let people in on what was really going on behind all the fame. He told me what went wrong and how he lost everything he had worked so hard to get. Join us as we find out the real story and the sad truth behind all those catchy songs. But before we can fully understand what happened, we need to go back to the beginning. Let's find out about Brian Connolly's childhood and how his journey started. The story of Brian Connolly began in 1945 in a town called Hamilton in South Lanarkshire, Scotland. From the very beginning, his life was very hard and tough. Frances Connolly, a young teen girl, was his real mother. She made money by working as a waitress. He was only a few days old when she left him alone in a hospital in Glasgow. It's likely that she was scared and didn't know what to do. No one ever found out who Brian's real dad was. Even many years later, it was still a puzzle that was never solved. Things finally went well for Brian when he was only 2 years old. Jim and Helen McManus, a kind and caring couple, chose to take him in. They lived in a spot called Blantyre. Brian was born into their family, and they raised him like he was their own. They cared for and loved him. They gave Brian the last name of their family, McManus. Because of this, he was always known as Brian McManus. Brian really thought that Jim and Helen were his real parents for a very long time. He had no idea at all about where he really came from or his real past. He thought his parents and he were just like any other kid. When Brian turned 18, though, everything in his life changed quickly. He was told the truth by someone. He was adopted as a child. Finding out this shocking news really shook Brian up inside. It made him feel confused and lost. He began to think about who he was. Brian made a big choice after he found out the truth. He chose to take back his birth name, Connolly, to honor and remember his real mother, even though he had never really known her. He would spend the rest of his life trying to figure out who he really was and where he fit. It was even said that something interesting was going on. Some people said that a popular actor named Mark McManus, who starred in a TV show called Taggart, might be related to Brian. There was a huge difference in how the two men looked. Some people even thought they might have shared a father, which would have made them half-brothers. There is no way to know for sure if this was true or not, but it made Brian's story even more mysterious and interesting. Brian's dreams were pretty easy when he was a young man. He first wanted to be an engineer, which means he would build and fix things. He planned to have a normal, safe, and predictable life with a steady job while he was in school. But something else was calling to him deep down. Music. There was something about Brian that made people like him right away. Plus, he was very good-looking, so everyone noticed him everywhere he went. The best thing about him, though, was his beautiful, smooth singing voice. People stopped to listen to him sing. His unique voice would soon make him one of the most famous and recognized singers, but he didn't know it yet. When Brian joined a band called Wainwright's Gentlemen in the 1970s, that was the start of his real musical journey. That time, people in the London area already knew a lot about this group. They put on shows in Hayes, Harrow, and Wembley, among other places. One of the band members' dads was in charge of the group and helped book shows and keep everything running smoothly. People came to dance and have fun at the clubs where they played their music. It was really cool that the band got to play in some national music events. For one of those big competitions, they got to play at the Lyceum Strand, which is a well-known venue. People from all over the world were able to see them perform because parts of it were shown on BBC One. The young players were really excited about this. This was the third time in the band's history that the same four people had played together. The group had new players join and leave. This band has had some really big names in it over the years, like guitarist Ian Gillan. After that, Ian Gillan became very popular as the lead singer of the huge rock band Deep Purple. If Ian Gillan quit Wainwright's Gentlemen in 1965, the band would have to find a new lead singer. Brian Connolly's big chance came at that time. He became the new lead singer, which meant he would be the lead singer in the front. The skill and energy Brian brought to the stage quickly wowed everyone who saw him. A lot of people liked him. At that time, a guy named Mick Tucker played the drums for the band. After a while, Mick and Brian became very good friends. They worked together for many years. They were really good at getting along with each other. They seemed to understand each other when they played music together. They clicked right away. Brian and Mick quickly became hungry for more. They wanted to begin something totally new and unique that was only for them. Once they had played with Wainwright's Gentlemen for a while, they both chose to quit the band in late 1967. They were eager to try something new and see what else they could make together. They had no idea that their choice to leave and start over would lead to something much, much bigger than they could have thought. They didn't know it yet, but it was the start of what would become the band Sweet. Brian and Mick made the choice to start their own band in January 1968. The name The Sweet Shop was chosen. A bassist and singer named Steve Priest was brought in. He had been playing with another band called The Army. Another person they hired was a guitarist called Frank Torpey. He had played with Mick Tucker in other bands. The new band played their first live show on March 9, 1968, at a place called The Pavilion in Hemel Hempstead. It was their first time performing in front of real people. At first, they played for small groups of people, but those who did come to see them could feel their energy and joy. They were interesting to watch, their songs were catchy and simple to remember, and their sound was different from other bands from that time. A man named Paul Nicholas was in charge of the band. Paul later became famous for his role in the hit show Hair. Phil Wainman was a record producer that Paul worked closely with. Wainman liked the sound and energy of the young band a lot. Phil thought they had a chance to grow into a big group. Frank Ocean helped them record their first hit, a song called Slow Motion. Fontana Records was the name of the company that put out the song. For the first time, everyone was excited. Things went wrong for the band right before the record came out, though. They found out that the name Sweet Shop was already being used by another artist. Brian's band had to change their name because two bands can't have the same name. They chose to go with just the Sweet instead. It worked because it was short and easy to remember. After that, people called them the Sweets. Their first few songs didn't do very well, which was a shame. Even though they put out a bunch of different songs, none of them made it to the top of the charts. Everyone in the band was really upset and annoyed about this. It took about a year of trying, but guitarist Frank Torpey finally gave up and quit the band. Everyone had a hard time. Brian and Mick didn't want to give up on their dream, though. Without fail, they were determined to keep going. Their self-assurance and ability to work well together kept them together through all the good and bad times. They thought that something good would happen in the end. After Frank Torp quit, the band went through more changes and new players. In 1969, a guitarist named Mick Stewart joined. His experience with rock music was good because he had played with bands called The Red. There were Caps, Johnny Kidd, and the Pirates. It was around this time that Sweet got a new record deal with the Parlophone label of the big company EMI. It was a big step forward. Lollipop Man, All You'll Ever Get From Me, and Get on the Line are the three new songs that they put out. Even though the band had high hopes for these songs, none of them became hits. Still, they weren't getting on the charts. Brian's resolve never wavered, even after all of these setbacks and disappointments. He was still very sure that the band would become famous one day. He wasn't going to give up hope. Then something very important took place that made everything different. In 1970, Brian and Mick got back in touch with Phil Wainman, their old manager who had helped them before. Phil put them in touch with Nicky Chinn and Mike Chapman, two young musicians. This meeting would be very important. People knew Nicky and Mike for writing catchy pop hits that people couldn't get out of their heads. It was important for them to find the right group to perform their songs. To make a demo song called Funny Funny, Brian, Mick, and Steve sing on it. Session players played on this demo. Professional studio players played all the instruments, and the people in the suite only sang. People were quickly interested when Phil Weinman sent this song to different record labels to try to get someone to release it. Companies that make records were interested. They had been looking forward to this break. At about the same time, the band held tryouts to find a new guitarist to replace the one who had quit. They found a great musician called Andy Scott who was from Wales. In the past, Andy had worked with Paul McCartney's brother Mike McCartney in a group called The Scaffold. He had also been in a band called the Elastic Band. Andy got along great with Steve, Mick, Brian, and Mick. Andy Scott played guitar, Steve Priest played bass, Mick Tucker played drums, and Brian Connolly was the lead singer and leader for Sweet. This was the band's first and most famous lineup. The four people worked well together. They worked on their songs and getting closer as a band for weeks and weeks. Next, on September 26, 1970, at the Windsor Ballroom and Redcar, they played their first live show together. There was electricity between all four of them. You could sense the power. Brian was the most charismatic person on stage. He knew how to get people to do what he wanted. People were naturally drawn to him, and his singing was so beautiful. All four of them had the perfect mix of style, personality, and raw ability. It all fell into place. Soon, everyone would know their name. Things were going to go well soon. Sweet didn't want to sound like any other band from the start. Their wish was for something special and different. They got ideas from bands like the Monkees and the Archies, whose songs were catchy and made people want to smile and sing along. But they also loved the bigger and harder rock sound of bands like The Who. The members of Sweet made a very interesting choice. They chose to mix these two worlds together. They used the happy, upbeat chords of pop music, where the voices mixed together beautifully with loud, distorted guitars and heavy, pounding drums. They became known for this strange mix of bubblegum, pop music, and hard rock. Does that sound good? What set them apart and helped people recognize them? It made their sound totally different from all the other bands that were making music at the time. Sweet were ahead of their time in a lot of ways. They did something different from everyone else. They made a sound that would later be used by glam metal acts many years later. Other artists would try to do the same thing Sweet did. Their path to fame began in a pretty humble and simple way. One of the first albums they were on wasn't even their own, which was strange. Their first record, Gimme Dat Ding, was a cheap collection of different songs released in December 1970. A band called the Pipkins played on one side of the record. Their hit song gave the album its funny name. The Sweet was the other side of the record. It had songs from their 3 Parlophone singles that they had already put out. It's interesting that guitarist Andy Scott was in the picture for the record cover even though he hadn't played on any of the songs yet. He was a new member. Those older records don't have him on them, then. It was only a small thing, but it was still a big step forward for the band. They slowly found their sound and became more aware of who they were as a group. A short time would pass before the whole world began. If you want to know when they were really important, it was in December 1970. That's when Sweet made their first TV shows up on the hit pop music show Lift Off. They sang their brand new song Funny Funny live on TV, in front of tens of thousands of people. It was clear from the first listen that something very special was going on with this band. Around the same time, Nicky Chin and Mike Chapman, a famous songwriting duo who had written Funny Funny for them, signed an important management deal with Sweet. With Phil Weinman back as their chief producer, who was in charge of the recordings, the band also signed a deal with RCA Records to record all over the world. This was really big. It meant that everyone would be able to hear their songs. North America, which includes the US and Canada, was the only place that was different. Instead of E. Tito Annette's, a company called Bell Records would put out their songs. Still, this was a huge deal for the band. Chin and Chapman wrote the song Funny Funny, which came out on RCA Records in March 1971. Sweet finally had their first big hit. The song was their first big hit outside of the United States. It made it into the top 20 in several countries. The record was bought and requested on the radio all over the world. It made the band happy, but not everything they put out has yet become a hit. EMI put out one of their older songs, All You'll Ever Get From Me, again in May 1971 in the hopes that it would do better this time. It didn't make the charts, though. They didn't want to buy it. Then in June 1971, their next song, Coco, came out. It really put them on the map when this song became a big hit. It got to number 2 on the UK charts, which means that almost everyone in the UK heard it. The band was really getting well known now. Alexander Graham Bell was the name of their next song. This one didn't do as well, it only got to number 33 on the charts. They thought it was good, but not as good as they had hoped. People were really liking these songs, but there was something most of the fans didn't know. This meant that most of the instruments on these recordings were still being played by paid session musicians, not by band members. Most of the time, the members of Sweet only sang. On the tracks, other people played the guitars, bass, and drums while they sang. In the beginning, they were mostly just artists. This would change in the future. In November of that same year, 1971, Sweet put out their first full-length record, which was called Funny How Sweet Coco Can Be. The album had their most current hit singles as well as some brand new songs that Chin and Chapman wrote. Cover songs of other artists' music were also on the album. For example, Daydream by the Lovin' Spoonful and Reflections by the Supremes were new versions of songs by other artists. The whole album was made in London, and Phil Weinman was in charge of it. Richard Dodd and Eric Holland were in charge of sound and made sure everything sounded good. Even though the record didn't go straight to the top of the charts or sell millions of copies, it was still a big deal for the band. It made everyone see what they were capable of and what they were capable of. They were able to reach even higher goals and dream bigger because of it. By 1972, Sweet could not be stopped at all. They were moving so fast that nothing could stop them. They put out a song called Papa Joe in February, and it went straight to number 1 in Sweden and Finland. It got to number 11 in the UK. People really liked it. After that, Little Willie and Wigwam Bam were two more big hits. In the UK, both of these songs made it all the way to number 4. In America, Little Willie was their biggest hit. When Sweet was re-released in the US in 1973, it climbed to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 list, and people loved what they heard. The band went through a huge shift with these songs. In fact, Wigwam Bam was the first song on which all of the members of Sweet played their own instruments. No more backup bands. In turn, this made their music sound stronger and more sure of itself. It was clear what the difference was. It seemed more real and strong. When Blockbuster came out in January 1973, it was a huge hit. It was the number 1 song in the UK for 5 weeks straight. It was sung by everyone in Britain. It was on the radio all the time. Hellraiser, their next song, got to number 2 on the charts. Their first record in the United States, simply called The Sweet, came out soon after. Was made public in July 1973. The band was now well known across the whole country. They went on famous TV shows like Top of the Pops and Supersonic to get more people to listen to and buy their music. Millions of people watched them perform. A performance of Blockbuster on Top of the Pops made a lot of noise and got people talking. When bassist Steve Priest came on the show, he was wearing a German military outfit with a Nazi symbol on his armband. A great many people were shocked by this, and many watchers were very angry because they thought it was rude and offensive. But it also showed how far the band was ready to go to shock people and get their attention. No matter how people felt about them, they wanted it to be talked about. Sweet really got into the glam rock style that was popular in the early 1970s. At that time, they were big stars along with Gary Glitter, T-Rex, Queen, Slade, and Wizard. All of these bands had crazy, bright outfits that made them look like they were from another world. Lipstick, eyeshadow, and glitter were all over their faces, and they had a lot of energy on stage that got people excited. But behind all the shine and glitter, the band was getting more and more tense. They didn't like being thought of as a bubblegum pop band that only made kid-friendly songs that were easy and silly. They wanted to be seen as real rock artists who knew how to play their instruments and write songs with meaning. Chin and Chapman, who were in charge of them, kept pushing them to keep up their pop image. They kept making happy hits that sold a lot of copies and made a lot of money. But these songs didn't show what the band really wanted to play or how they really sounded. The people in the band felt stuck and angry. To make things more even and show their rock side, Sweet began writing their own harder, heavier songs to go with their hits. The second song on a record that doesn't get played on the radio as much is called a B-side. Their early pop hits, like Funny Funny and Papa Joe, became less important during live shows and events. But instead, they decided to play their own rock songs in medleys, which are mixes of famous rock songs from other bands. But this change wasn't liked by everyone in their public. Some fans came because they knew the happy pop songs they heard on the radio. At one show in Kilmarnock, Scotland, in 1973, people started throwing bottles at the band inside the venue. Things got scary and out of control. Some people said it was because of the band's glam look. They didn't look like tough rock bands because of the makeup, eyeshadow, and shiny clothes. Some people said that the crowd didn't know the songs because Sweet played album tracks instead of their hits. In any case, it was a bad night, but one of their biggest hits came from that crazy, bottle-throwing night. They wrote The Ballroom Blitz after that experience. It came out later that year and quickly became one of their most popular songs ever. Bad things can happen and lead to great art. Even though there was a lot of trouble, Sweet's fame kept growing, especially in the UK, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and Australia. People in those places thought they were big stars. The band made an easy but important change by the end of 1973. They chose to make their name easier to say. After that, they would be known as Sweet instead of The Sweet. It was only one word that was changed, but it was the beginning of a new story. The band members were determined to make their own songs and control how they were seen. They had had enough of Chin and Chapman and were very angry with them. Yes, those songwriters' songs helped Sweet become well-known and popular. But they also stuck them in a pop image that the band thought they were too old for. They were tired of being known as a teen pop band. One of Chin and Chapman's songs, called Dynamite, was even turned down by the band. It seemed too pop, so they didn't want to record it. After that, a group called Mud made that song a big hit. Sweet didn't care, though. They thought they should go in a different way. They started working on their own material and writing their own songs because they really wanted to show that they were real rock artists. They made an album called Sweet Fanny Adams with the help of their producer Phil Weinman and sound engineer Peter Coleman. It came out in April 1974. Self-written hard rock songs like Sweet F.A. filled the whole record. Free Me. These songs were rough, loud, and heavy. The record showed the band in a whole new way. They were big and loud, and the bubblegum sticker that had been on them was finally off. What they could really do was being shown to everyone. Their sound was much stronger than before, and so did the way they looked. They stopped wearing so much makeup and bling and started to look more like regular rock bands. They took on a more serious and tough appearance. They didn't want to look like pop stars, but like real rock stars. The record also had their famous high-pitched vocal harmonies, in which the voices of the band members would blend together in a very unique way. This became a part of their sound that people knew right away. You knew it was Sweet when you heard those chords. Yet, something terrible took place that would make everything different. As the band worked on this record, Brian Connolly was stabbed during a fight in the English town of Staines. He was badly hurt and beaten, and the damage to his throat will last a long time. His voice cords were hurt by this. Brian's speaking voice was never the same again after this attack. His power and range had gone down a bit. His voice was broken forever. It used to be so strong and beautiful. Stephen Priest and Andy Scott, two other band members, had to sing lead on some of the album songs because of this terrible injury. No You Don't, Into the Night, and Restless were some of the songs they sang until Brian got too tired to do it. Brian spent time with a throat expert who was trying to help him get better, but he still finished working on the album. There was no way he was going to give up. Everyone in the public and the media was told by the band that Brian only had a short-term throat infection. The real story about the attack was kept secret because they didn't want other people to know it. It made me look bad and scared me. It was disappointing that the album Sweet Fanny Adams didn't lead to any hit songs in the UK. The song Peppermint Twist Our Rebel Rouser did, however, hit number 1 in Japan, New Zealand, and Australia, among other places. The band didn't like that the record company put it out without even telling them first. Candid Sweet's only album that wasn't a compilation, even though it didn't have any hit songs. A record with brand new songs, not just old hits, that can get into the UK Top 40. That really was a big accomplishment. Around this time, something very important almost took place. Pete Townsend, the famous lead singer of The Who, asked Sweet to open for The Who at Charlton Athletics football ground in June 1974. This would have been Sweet's dream come true. He had always loved The Who and often sang their songs at live shows. Brian's throat injury was still too bad, though, so they had to cancel. They had to turn down this wonderful chance. That was a very sad time for a band that had looked up to The Who for a long time. Brian must have felt bad about failing to perform with his band. Even with this loss, Sweet were still growing and changing quickly. They did a good job of moving away from being pop stars and becoming real, well-known rock icons. Things looked better, but then they went horribly wrong. As of 1978, Sweet were on tour all over the US, which was a big deal. They shared stages with stars like Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, who were huge in the United States. At this point in Brian Connolly's career, this should have been another shining moment to enjoy and be proud of. It was bright and exciting, but things were going badly behind all the cheers and lights. From March to May of that year, the band played in places all over the United States. Then, on May 3, in Birmingham, Alabama, the worst thing that could have happened. That night, executives from Capitol Records were in the crowd, ready to watch Sweet's show. These were important people in the music business who could help the band's career. But what they saw was not a strong professional show, it was a total disaster that no one could forget. Brian looked very drunk when he went on stage that night. Right away, it was clear that something was very wrong. It was hard to understand him because his voice was slurred. He was moving all over the place. His steps were all over the place on stage. The worst thing happened in the middle of the show. In front of everyone, Brian actually passed out on stage. He tripped and couldn't get up. There was no way for the rest of the band to finish the show without their lead singer, which was very strange and embarrassing. There was a moment when everything changed for the band. The terrible thing that happened made Brian and the rest of the group feel very bad, and the show finished early. The people in charge at Capitol Records had seen everything. It didn't look at all official. This might hurt their chances of getting into America. Things didn't get better for Brian when the band went back to Britain for a short time after that terrible show. And things were getting worse for him with drinking. He had a lot more to drink than ever before. The link between him and the rest of the band was breaking down. No longer did they talk to each other much. The bond and friendship they used to have was going away. It was too much for everyone in the group to handle by the time they started their second part of the US tour later that same month at Tinchorda Strater, playing with Foghat and Alice Cooper. It was bad for everyone to be around each other. Everyone was upset and angry. It was getting harder and harder to trust Brian's health, and no one could count on him to show up and act. People in his band, especially Mick Tucker and Steve Priest, with whom he used to be very close, were becoming less and less close to him. By early July 1978, when the tour was finally over, it was hard to ignore the band's problems any longer. Everyone knew things couldn't go on like this because everything was broken. In October of that same year, all of Sweet's members got together at a place called Clearwell Castle. They went to work on writing new songs for their next release. They worked on new songs together for days. They went to Townhouse Studios in Shepherd's Bush, London, to start recording an album called Cut Above the Rest after the writing sessions were over. But all of the stress and bad mood in the band followed them into the studio. Things didn't get better just because they were making songs. Everyone was worried about Brian's health and the fact that he behaved in ways that no one could predict. Because of his illness, the recording sessions were very hard and stressful for him. In the studio, the mood was tense and awkward. No one was having fun any longer. It wasn't fun to make songs, it felt like work. Mick Tucker, a longtime friend of Brian's and an original member of the band, was asked to help produce Brian's vocals on the album. The other people in the band thought Mick could make Brian a better person. They had been together for a long time and been through a lot together. Mick is the person who could help Brian the most. They recorded a few songs with Brian singing on them, hoping and praying that they could find the magic that made Sweet what it was. They were eager to hear the Brian with the beautiful voice that had made them famous. When all the recording was over, though, and they listened to what they had made, the results made everyone sad and unhappy. Brian's voice had lost its strength. It used to be so strong, beautiful, and dominating. The new Brian didn't sound like the old one. You could hear the damage, the pain, and the years of hard work. Everyone in the band looked at each other and knew what was going on. They were stuck and couldn't move forward. It had to get better. It hurt to say it, but Brian could no longer be in the band. He was stopping them, and they couldn't count on his health. It was quiet when Brian Connolly left Sweet on November 2, 1978. Nothing important was said, there was no news conference, and there was no farewell show. He just left. A few months later, on February 23, 1979, David Walker, the band's manager, told everyone about it. The press was given an official statement that said Brian was going to go out on their own and try out country music, rock music, and a different type of music that sounded more American and calm. But the truth is that everyone who knew about it knew the real reasons. He had physical problems. Because he was drinking so much and getting farther away from the other band members, they could no longer work together. All of Brian's leaving together marked the end of an era for Sweet. The classic combination was no longer possible. There was no more golden voice. Brian hoped and dreamed of starting over in his job and being successful on his own after he left Sweet. To show that he could still make it as an artist, he did this. He had high hopes for things to go his way, but they didn't. A songwriter named Roger Greenaway wrote his first hit as a solo artist, which was called Don't You Know a Lady? He put all of his dreams into this song. It's too bad that it didn't have any effect at all. It wasn't bought by anyone. It wasn't played on the radio, and it was never heard again. Brian's deal with Polydor Records was over in 1982. The record company stopped wanting to work with him, but Brian didn't give up. In order to start over in Europe, he signed with a French record company called Carrere Records. Record Business, a UK music magazine, said that Brian's new song, Hypnotized, would come out in March 1982. It was his first song by himself in 3 years since he left. Nice. That's a very long time to not be into music. The tune. That song was called Hypnotized, and it was a hard rock one. In the beginning, a band called Fandango played it. Brian's version was released by RCA Records all over Europe, so it was heard by a lot of people. But, once more, it didn't make the charts. Not a single person bought his songs. Brian didn't give up, even though he was having a hard time. Several brand new songs were made for an album that was set to come out in August 1983. He probably worked on these songs for months. Sad to say, though, that record was never actually released. Brian's music wasn't selling, so the record company must have turned it down. It wasn't worth all that work. Brian wouldn't give up on his dream, though. He didn't give up. As part of the opening band for the huge rock star Pat Benatar in January 1983, he played shows by himself. It was in Birmingham, Newcastle, and at the famous Hammersmith Odeon in London that he did 3 shows. It was a great chance to play in front of a lot of people. This time, Brian had a band called Encore play these shows. Some really great players were on it, like John Verity from the band Argent and Terry Utley from Smokey. They sang a mix of old Sweet hits and new solo songs together. They played songs like Winter City, Fox on the Run, Hypnotized, and their own songs like Sick and Tired, Red Hot and Rage, and Burning the Candle at Both Ends. Over time, fans recorded some of these shows and shared them on bootleg recordings, which are illegal recordings that people swapped with each other. However, Brian did not make any money from these releases as they were not public. Brian worked very hard to get his music business back on track and stay relevant, but he was hit with another huge blow that he wasn't expecting. He and everyone else in Sweet got a huge tax bill from the British Tax Office, which is also known as the Inland Revenue, for money they had made during their successful years.